He smiled when he spoke about pain. I understood why. Too late. That's the confession I want to make tonight. Not as a clinician, not as someone who has written papers or stood behind a lectern, just as a person who missed something essential while looking right at it. My name is Elias Hart. I'm 59 years old. I've been a psychotherapist for 31 years, and for most of that time, I believed I was good at what I did. Not perfect. I never wanted to be perfect, but good, attentive, present. The kind of therapist who could hold silence without panic, who could sit with someone's worst day and not turn away. And then I met someone who taught me I'd been looking in the wrong direction all along. His name, well, I'll call him Michael. That wasn't his real name. I've changed everything that might identify him. His age, his profession, the city where he lived, the exact circumstances of how we met. What I can't change, what I won't change, is the truth of what happened between us. The truth of what I failed to see. This isn't a story about diagnosis. I won't give you clinical terms or frameworks. Those feel like armor now, and I don't want armor tonight. I want to tell you what it felt like, what he felt like, and what it cost me to finally understand. Michael came to my office on a Thursday in October. I remember because the rain had just started, that early autumn rain that smells like wet leaves and cold stone. He was 42, tall, thin in a way that suggested he'd recently lost weight without meaning to. He wore a gray sweater with a small hole near the collar, the kind of imperfection that makes someone seem more real, more present. He smiled when he shook my hand. A warm smile, genuine, the kind that reaches the eyes. That should have been my first clue. He sat in the chair across from me, not the couch, he never used the couch, and he folded his hands in his lap like a schoolboy waiting for the teacher to speak. I asked him what brought him in, and he said very calmly, very evenly, "I think I need help learning how to feel things again." I nodded. I'd heard versions of that sentence 1,000 times. Numbness, disconnection, the protective distance the mind creates when the world becomes too much. "Can you tell me more about that?" I asked, and he smiled again. "It's like," he said, "I'm watching my life through glass. I can see everything happening, work, friends, daily routines, but I can't touch it. I can't feel it. And the strange thing is, it doesn't bother me. That's what worries me most, that it doesn't bother me." I wrote that down. I underlined it. I thought I understood what he was telling me. I didn't. Not even close. We met every Thursday at 4 o'clock for 3 months, 12 sessions. In that time, I learned the surface facts of his life. He worked in architecture. He lived alone in a small apartment near the river. He had a younger sister he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. He liked coffee black, the way I did. He always arrived exactly 5 minutes early and waited in the hallway until I opened the door. He was unfailingly polite, thoughtful. He laughed at the right moments, asked questions about books on my shelf, remembered details from previous sessions. He did everything a good patient is supposed to do. And he smiled. God, he smiled so much. I want you to understand something about therapeutic work. When someone comes to you carrying pain, they usually show it in obvious ways. Tears, anger, silence so thick it fills the room. You learn to read those signs. You learn to meet people in their suffering and hold space for it. But what do you do when someone arrives wrapped in courtesy, When their pain wears a pleasant face and shakes your hand warmly. You miss it. That's what you do. You miss it entirely. In our fourth session, Michael told me about his childhood. He spoke in that same calm, measured tone. His father was distant. His mother was anxious. His sister was the golden child. Classic family dynamics, he said, smiling. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain why he felt like he was living behind glass. "Do you ever feel angry about it?" I asked. He considered the question for a long moment, his fingers tracing the armrest of the chair. "I don't think so," he said finally. "I think I used to, but now it just feels like, facts, like reading about someone else's life in a newspaper." I nodded. I thought we were making progress. I thought he was intellectualizing as a defense, and that eventually, if I was patient enough, the feelings would surface. That was my first mistake, assuming that feelings were buried when they might have been something else entirely. After each session, I would sit alone in my office for 10 minutes before the next patient arrived. I'd review my notes, reflect on what had been said and what hadn't. With Michael, I always had the same uneasy sensation, like I was listening to a recording of a conversation rather than having one. But I told myself that was progress too, that the distance he felt was showing up in our work together, and that awareness was the first step toward change. I was good at telling myself comfortable lies. Session 7, late November. The rain had turned to sleet, tapping against the window like nervous fingers. Michael arrived 5 minutes early, as always, but this time when I opened the door, I noticed something different. His smile was a fraction slower. It's strange, the things you notice as a therapist. The micro-expressions, the hesitations, the way someone holds their breath before answering a simple question. I'd been trained to watch for these details, to treat them like breadcrumbs leading toward truth. He sat down and said, "I want to tell you about something that happened last week." "Of course," I said, pen ready. "I was standing on the subway platform," he began, his voice steady, almost conversational. "Rush hour, crowded." And I felt this sudden urge to step forward, not jump. I want to be clear about that. Just step, to see what would happen if I let my foot move 6 inches closer to the edge. He paused, smiled. I didn't, obviously, but the thought stayed with me. It was interesting, curious, like conducting an experiment. Every alarm in my body should have gone off. Every protocol I'd been trained to follow should have activated. Instead, I felt relief. He was finally sharing something real, something beneath the pleasant surface. I thought we were breaking through. "That must have been frightening," I said carefully. He tilted his head, considering. "Not really. It was more like watching someone else consider it. Does that make sense?" "The distance you've been describing," I said. "The glass between you and your life." "Exactly." He smiled again, warmly, gratefully. "You understand." I asked all the right questions, whether he'd thought about it since, whether he had a plan, whether he felt safe. He answered each one with the same calm honesty. No, no, yes. He wasn't suicidal, he explained. He was just curious about the mechanics of it, the way someone might wonder what it feels like to fly. "Have you felt this curiosity before?" I asked. "Sometimes," he said, "driving home late at night on empty roads, or looking down from my apartment balcony. Just these little moments where I think, what if?" and then it passes, and I make dinner or watch television or go to sleep. I made him promise to call me if those thoughts became stronger. I gave him crisis numbers. I documented everything carefully in my notes after he left. But here's what I didn't do. I didn't recognize that someone who smiles when describing the edge of a subway platform might already be standing somewhere beyond my reach. I need to tell you something about myself, something I've never said aloud in quite this way. I became a therapist because I was terrified of my own feelings. Not everyone goes into this work for pure reasons. Some of us are drawn to other people's pain because it's easier than facing our own. We learn the language of emotions, the theories and frameworks, and we use them like shields. We sit in the therapist's chair and nod and reflect and interpret, and we never have to say, "I'm afraid too. I don't know either. I'm just as lost." When I was 34 years old, my younger brother died. Not suddenly. Cancer, slow and methodical, 6 months from diagnosis to burial. I visited him every week in the hospital. I held his hand. I said all the right things. And I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt something, but it was wrapped in so many layers of professional composure, of therapeutic distance, that I couldn't name it, couldn't touch it. I stood at his funeral and delivered a eulogy that made people weep, and I was watching myself do it from somewhere else, somewhere safe, behind glass. I never told Michael this. Patient confidentiality flows one way, and that's right, that's how it should be. But sitting across from him in those sessions, listening to him describe his numbness with such precision, I heard an echo of something familiar. And instead of recognizing it as a warning, I felt comforted by it. Here was someone who understood, someone who lived in that same distant country where feelings were observed rather than felt, where pain was interesting rather than devastating. I thought I could help him because I'd learned to function in that space myself. What I didn't realize was that functioning isn't the same as living, and numbness isn't the same as peace. Session 9 was 2 days before Thanksgiving. Michael came in with a small cut on his hand, just above his thumb. I asked him about it absently, the way you might comment on someone's new haircut. "Oh," he said, glancing down as if he'd forgotten it was there. I was opening a can and the opener slipped, caught my hand. "Did it hurt?" I asked. He looked at me then with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I suppose it must have," he said, "but I didn't really notice until I saw the blood." He smiled. I wrote it in my notes, possible dissociation from physical pain. I underlined it. I planned to explore it in our next session. But I didn't see it. The real thing. The truth hiding inside those words. The week after Thanksgiving, Michael didn't show up for his appointment. Thursday at 4 o'clock. I waited in my office, watching the clock. 4:15, 4:30. I checked my voicemail. Nothing. My email, nothing. It happens sometimes. People miss sessions. Emergencies arise. They forget. They decide therapy isn't helping, and they disappear without a word, leaving you to wonder if you failed them or if they simply didn't need you anymore. I told myself it was probably nothing. I sent a brief email. "Hope everything is okay. Let me know when you'd like to reschedule." Professional. Unobtrusive. But I knew. Somewhere beneath my careful composure, I knew. Friday morning, I received a call from a woman who identified herself as Michael's sister. She spoke in short, clipped sentences, the way people do when they're trying not to break. Michael had died on Tuesday night. Carbon monoxide poisoning, his car running in a closed garage. A note on the passenger seat addressed to no one in particular. Just 3 words. I'm sorry. Tired. She didn't blame me. That's what she said. She knew Michael had been seeing someone. She thought maybe it had helped him last a little longer. She wanted me to know he'd spoken kindly about me. I sat at my desk after we hung up, and I couldn't move. The morning light was pale and cold through the window. The coffee in my mug had gone lukewarm. The clock kept ticking. I'd been trained for this. Suicide happens. Not often, but it happens. There are protocols, documentation, consultation, self-care. You acknowledge what you couldn't control. You recognize that some people are too far gone before you ever meet them. You forgive yourself for being human. But none of that helped, because this wasn't about protocols. This was about a man who smiled when he spoke about pain, and a therapist who smiled back because he understood that kind of pain too well. I closed my office that day, canceled my afternoon patients. I drove home and sat in my living room as the light faded, and I finally let myself feel it. The guilt, the failure, the unbearable fact that I'd been sitting 3 feet away from someone who was drowning and I'd mistaken his calm for progress. I need to be honest about what came next, not the noble version where I immediately learned and grew and became a better therapist. The true version. I fell apart. For 2 weeks I couldn't see patients. I told my receptionist I had the flu. I sat in my apartment and replayed every session with Michael in my mind, looking for the moment I should have seen it, the word I should have said, the question I should have asked. I found dozens of them. When he talked about standing on the subway platform, I should have recognized that as more than ideation. I should have insisted on more frequent sessions. I should have suggested medication, hospitalization, a crisis plan. When he showed me the cut on his hand and said he didn't notice the pain, I should have understood that someone who can't feel physical hurt might not feel the weight of ending either. When he smiled, when he smiled, I should have asked him why. What was behind that courtesy? What was he protecting me from? But the thing that haunted me most wasn't what I missed. It was what I recognized. I saw myself in him. That's the truth. I saw my own careful numbness, my own practiced distance, and instead of helping him find his way back to feeling, I met him in that numb space and called it therapeutic rapport. I was so afraid of my own pain that I couldn't see his clearly. My supervisor, a woman named Dr. Chen, who has worked in this field for 40 years, sat with me in her office on a gray December morning. I'd finally called her, finally admitted what had happened and how I'd frozen in the aftermath. She let me talk for almost an hour. Then she said something I didn't expect. Elias, do you know what the hardest part of this work is? Not losing people, I said, bitter. No, the hardest part is accepting that you're human, that you carry your own wounds into the room, and sometimes they make you blind to someone else's. You saw Michael through the lens of your own survival. You recognized his numbness because it mirrored yours, and you thought, he'll learn to live with it the way I did. But you didn't consider that not everyone wants to survive that way. Some people would rather not feel at all than feel so little it's worse than nothing. I sat with that for a long time. How do I come back from this? I asked finally. She looked at me with something like compassion. You don't come back, you go forward differently. You stop pretending you're separate from your patients. You stop believing that professionalism means never being vulnerable. And you accept that some people can't be saved, not because you failed, but because they made a choice you'll never fully understand. Michael's sister gave me permission to attend a small memorial service in early January. Just family and a few colleagues from his firm. I sat in the back, unsure if I belonged there. She stood at the front and spoke about her brother with the kind of love that makes you ache. She described his kindness, his attention to detail, the way he remembered everyone's birthday and sent handwritten cards. She talked about their childhood, the fights and reconciliations, the 2 years of silence that she now wished she could reclaim. He always seemed okay, she said, her voice breaking. He always said he was okay. And I believed him because it was easier than asking harder questions. After the service, she found me outside. Cold January air, snow threatening but not yet falling. Thank you for coming, she said, and thank you for seeing him. I know it couldn't have been easy. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I hadn't really seen him at all, that I'd looked at him and seen my own reflection instead. But what would that have accomplished? Who would it have helped? So I said, he was a remarkable person. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. She nodded. Then she said something that stayed with me. He left me a letter, a real one, not just the note in the car. He wrote that he was tired of pretending, that he'd been pretending his whole life, pretending to feel things he didn't feel, pretending to want things he didn't want. He said it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just how he was built, like a house with beautiful windows but no doors. You could look in, but you could never enter. She wiped her eyes. I thought you should know that, in case you were wondering if there was something you missed. He didn't want to be found. That's what his letter said. He didn't want to be saved. He just wanted permission to stop. I stood there in the cold, feeling something crack open inside me. Not relief, it wasn't that simple, but a kind of terrible understanding. Michael hadn't been waiting for me to rescue him. He'd been saying goodbye. Every session, every smile, every careful story had been part of a long farewell, and I'd been so focused on trying to fix him that I never considered he might not want to be fixed. I went back to work in late January. Slower at first, fewer patients. I told myself I needed to rebuild trust in my skills, in my judgment, in my ability to sit with someone's pain without making it about my own. But something had shifted. I stopped being so certain. I stopped believing that I could read people like books, that I could parse their emotions into neat categories and reflect them back with therapeutic precision. I started asking simpler questions, saying, I don't know more often, admitting when I was confused or afraid. And strangely, that made me better at my work. When you stop pretending to have all the answers, people feel safer telling you the truth. When you acknowledge your own humanity, your own failures, it gives others permission to be imperfect too. I think about Michael often, not every day, not anymore, but often enough that he's woven into who I am now as a therapist and as a person. I think about his smile, that warm, genuine smile that I mistook for contentment when it was actually goodbye. I think about the distance he described, the glass between him and his life, and I recognize it now as something different from what I understood at the time. Not depression, though that was certainly part of it. Not dissociation, though that too. But something closer to a fundamental incompatibility with the world. A sense that he'd been born without the equipment everyone else seemed to have for wanting to be alive. That's not something therapy can fix. That's not something anyone can fix. I've worked with people since then who remind me of Michael, who speak carefully, smile often, describe their pain in measured terms. And now I listen differently. I don't assume the calm is progress. I don't mistake courtesy for connection. I ask more direct questions. Are you tired of being alive? Have you thought about ending things? Do you want to keep going? Or are you just going through the motions because that's what people expect? And when someone answers honestly, when they say, yes, I'm tired, or yes, I've thought about it, or no, I don't really want to keep going, I don't rush to fix it. I sit with it. I acknowledge it. I say, that must be unbearably lonely. That must be exhausting. I'm glad you told me. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. The hardest lesson I've learned is that you can do everything right and still lose someone. You can see clearly, ask the right questions, offer genuine connection, and they can still choose to leave. That's not failure. That's just the terrible truth of what it means to be human. We can't save everyone. We can't even save ourselves sometimes. There's a moment in therapy, if you do it long enough, when you realize the person across from you is also looking at a mirror. They came to you for help, but what they're really seeking is recognition. Proof that someone sees them, really sees them. Not the version they perform for the world, but the hidden self they carry in silence. Michael gave me that gift, though it took me years to understand it. He showed me my own hiding, my own performance, the way I'd constructed an entire identity around being calm, being present, being professionally compassionate, while keeping my actual self locked safely away. After he died, I couldn't do that anymore. The walls I'd built between therapist and person, between professional and human, felt suddenly obscene. How could I ask others to be vulnerable while I remained protected? So I started saying things I'd never said before in session. I don't know what to say right now. That scares me too. I'm sitting here wishing I had better answers for you, and I don't. Some colleagues warned me against this. They said I was overcompensating, that I was burdening my patients with my own uncertainty. Maybe they were right, but I couldn't go back to the old way. I couldn't sit behind the therapist's mask anymore and pretend I had it figured out. Because here's what I learned from Michael. The people who need help most are often the ones who hide it best. They smile warmly. They say the right things. They show up on time and answer questions thoughtfully and never raise their voice or break down crying. They're so good at pretending that even trained professionals miss what's underneath. And the only way to reach them, the only way I know, is to stop pretending yourself. To be honest about your own struggles, your own doubts, your own moments of wanting to give up. Not in a way that centers your pain over theirs, but in a way that says, I'm human too. I'm afraid too. You're not alone in this. I started a practice I still maintain. At the end of each session, I ask one simple question. Is there something you wanted to tell me today but didn't? Most of the time, people say no. But sometimes, maybe once every few months, someone pauses, looks at their hands, and says the thing they've been holding back, the thing they thought would make me turn away. And I sit with it. I don't try to fix it or reframe it or offer false hope. I just say, "Thank you for trusting me with that. Thank you for being brave enough to say it out loud." That's what Michael needed. Not solutions, not strategies for feeling more. Just someone to say, "I hear how tired you are. I see how hard you've been working to stay, and if you can't keep going, I won't judge you for it." I never said that to him. I was too busy being a good therapist. It's been 5 years now since Michael died. 5 years since that phone call from his sister. 5 years since I sat in my living room and finally let myself crack open. People ask me sometimes if I still think about him. They ask carefully, the way people do when they're worried the answer might be unhealthy. As if grief has an expiration date. As if we're supposed to mourn and move on and never look back. Yes, I still think about him. But not in the way I did at first. Not with that crushing guilt, that obsessive replay of every missed signal. Now when I think about Michael, I feel something different, something closer to gratitude, though that word feels wrong given the circumstances. He taught me how to be a person again. Before him, I was performing a role, the good therapist, the wise counselor, the one who had it all figured out. I collected theories like armor. I studied techniques. I believed that if I just learned enough, practiced enough, maintained enough professional distance, I could protect both my patients and myself from the messy reality of being human. Michael shattered that illusion. Not because he meant to, not because he wanted to hurt me, but because his death forced me to see what I'd been avoiding my entire career. I am not separate from my patients. I am not above them or beyond them. I carry the same fears, the same numbness, the same terrible question they bring into my office. What's the point of all this? Why keep going? And the only honest answer I can give is, I don't always know. Some days I wake up and feel that same glass between me and the world that Michael described. Some days I go through the motions, coffee, shower, drive to work, and feel like I'm watching someone else's life. Some days I stand at my office window and think, what if I just stopped? What if I let myself admit that I'm tired too? The difference, the only difference, is that I have people who know. My partner, my friends, my own therapist, yes, because I finally admitted I needed one. They know I struggle. They know I'm not always okay. And knowing that someone knows makes it possible to keep going. That's what Michael didn't have. Or maybe he had it but couldn't accept it. Maybe he was so good at pretending that even when people offered genuine connection, he couldn't believe it was real. Maybe he was just tired. I want to tell you something practical now. Not advice. I don't have the right to give advice anymore. But something I've learned that might matter. If someone in your life seems okay, if they smile warmly, ask about your day, never complain, never break down, never seem to need anything, check on them. Ask the hard questions. Are you really okay, or are you just saying that? What's the hardest part of your day? Do you ever feel like giving up? And when they deflect, because they will deflect, don't accept it. Push gently. Say, I care about you enough to ask the uncomfortable questions. I'd rather know the truth than pretend everything's fine. The people who need help most are often the ones who never ask for it. They've learned to be so self-sufficient, so careful not to burden others, that asking for help feels like failure. They'll smile through unbearable pain because that's what they've always done. And sometimes, they'll come see a therapist like me, hoping we'll see through the performance without them having to drop the mask themselves, hoping we'll somehow know to ask the question they can't ask. Can I stop now? Have I done enough? Is it okay to be tired? I didn't ask Michael those questions. I thought I was being respectful by following his lead, by letting him guide the pace of therapy. I thought I was being a good therapist by not pushing too hard. I was wrong. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to accept someone's careful performance. Sometimes love means saying, I see you pretending, and I'm not going to let you hide anymore. Sometimes saving someone means making them uncomfortable. But here's the hardest truth, the one I've struggled with most. Even if you do everything right, even if you ask the hard questions and refuse the easy answers and sit with someone in their darkest moments, they might still choose to leave. They might still decide that the cost of staying is more than they can bear. And that's not your fault. It's taken me 5 years to really believe that. 5 years of therapy of my own. 5 years of sitting with the guilt and the what-ifs and the crushing weight of responsibility. Michael made his own choice. I didn't make it for him. I couldn't have prevented it, even if I'd seen all the signs, even if I'd said all the right things. Because ultimately, we are each the author of our own ending. That's both terrifying and necessary. Terrifying because it means we can't save everyone. Necessary because it means people have autonomy over their own lives, even when they choose things we can't understand. I'm sitting in my office as I tell you this, the same office where Michael sat 12 times 5 years ago. The rain is falling again. It's always falling in this city. And the clock on the wall is ticking softly, counting seconds that will become minutes that will become the rest of my life. The chair where he sat is currently occupied by someone else. A woman in her 30s who came to me last month saying she felt disconnected from her life, who smiled warmly when I asked how she was doing, who said she was fine, just looking for some tools to manage stress. And I recognized her. Not because I'd met her before, but because I'd seen that particular kind of fine, that careful, well-practiced fine. That fine that means I'm drowning, but I've learned to do it quietly. So I asked her, "Are you tired of being alive?" She stared at me for a long moment. Then she started crying, real crying, the kind that shakes your whole body. And through the tears she said, "Yes, God, yes. How did you know?" I told her the truth. I said, because someone taught me to look past the smile. Someone who I failed to see when he needed me most. And I promised myself I wouldn't miss it again. We're 6 sessions in now. She's still tired. She's still struggling. But she's not pretending anymore. She's telling me the truth about how hard it is, how many mornings she doesn't want to get out of bed, how many times she's thought about what it would be like to just not exist. And I'm sitting with her in that truth, not trying to fix it, not offering false hope, just saying, "I see you, I hear you, you're not alone." I don't know if it will be enough. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe she'll make it through and look back on this time as something she survived. Maybe she'll decide, like Michael did, that she's too tired to keep going. Either way, I'll have been honest with her. I'll have shown up as a person, not just a therapist. I'll have acknowledged my own uncertainty, my own fear, my own humanity. And that's all I can do. Michael died on a Tuesday night in late November. He smiled when he spoke about pain, and I understood why, but too late. He saved my life anyway. Not by dying, not because his death taught me some convenient lesson, but because his absence forced me to become the kind of person who can hold both truths at once, that life is unbearably hard and that it's worth fighting for. That we are all performing, all hiding, all pretending to varying degrees, and that the most radical thing we can do is stop. Stop pretending we're okay when we're not. Stop hiding our struggles to spare others discomfort. Stop believing that being professional means never being vulnerable. Michael couldn't stop pretending, or maybe he could, but he was too tired to try. I'm trying for both of us now. The rain is still falling. The clock is still ticking. Another patient will arrive in 10 minutes, and I'll open the door and invite them in, and I'll sit across from them with all my failures and uncertainties visible. And maybe that will be enough. He smiled when he spoke about pain. Now I understand why.